All right. Hello, everybody. I will give everyone just another minute or two to join us for our webinar. Thank you all for joining, and we're really excited to be talking about this with you today. Hello, everybody. All right, we will go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. This is going to be a conversation between Work to Zero and AIHA, and we'll tell you a little bit more about ourselves in just a moment. But we will be talking about this topic of lone worker safety and delve into sort of the world of lone worker technologies. My name is Kenna Carlson, and I am a research associate with the National Safety Council's Work to Zero initiative. So to kick us off really quickly, I do want to just give a quick overview of what we'll be talking about in today's webinar. So we will start off with some introductions from AIHA's Emerging Digital Technologies Committee, and I will also talk a little bit about Work to Zero. And a lot of the information that is coming from this webinar is actually from a white paper that we will be releasing in the coming days on lone worker safety and give an overview of lone worker technologies. So we'll be talking through some of the risks of lone work, an overview of lone worker technologies, and we'll also be talking about some of the benefits and the considerations that you can make if you're interested in lone worker technologies. We will also have a panel discussion moderated by Mike Groh. Mike is the chair of AIHA's Emerging Digital Technologies Committee. We will also be joined by Megan Fleck, the EHS Systems Advisor with Ovintiv, and Dave Wagner, the Director of Applications Engineering and Field Services at Industrial Scientific. And I would like to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please feel free to use that Q&A tab, and we will certainly try to answer as many of those at the end as we can. AIHA also does have a standard disclaimer statement for their content, which I would like to just throw up on the screen. But in the meantime, I would like to roll out our first poll. So I'm really interested in knowing who is actually on this call. So for the first question, I'm interested in knowing, do you employ lone workers? So I'll give everyone just a quick moment to answer that poll. Right. So it looks like 70% of you all do currently employ lone workers. So we have a great breakdown of those of you who are employing lone workers, and we hope that you can get some good education out of this webinar. So thank you all for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce our moderator and our panelists for today's discussion. You'll hear a lot from me in the first half of this webinar, and then that later half we will be having a discussion with Mike Groh. He will be moderating that discussion, and Mike is the Director of Health and Safety at GE Appliances, and he is also AIHA's Emerging Digital Technology Committee Chair. Next, we have Megan Fleck. So Megan is an EHS professional currently working for Ovintiv USA. She has over 5 years of industry experience, holding multiple roles within Ovintiv. Megan earned a master's in public health with a dual concentration in epidemiology and environmental and occupational health and safety from the University of North Texas Health Science Center, as well as a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences from the University of Oklahoma. We also have Dave Wagner. So Dave is the Director of Applications Engineering and Field Services for Industrial Scientific Corporation. He's been a leader in developing instrumentation and solutions to complex gas detection problems since joining the company in 1986. Dave has served as a member of the AIHA Real-Time Detection Committee and as a member of the NFPA 350 Committee developing a best practice guide for confined space entry. Dave holds a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from Penn State University and a Master's of Science degree in Management and Technology from Carlow University in Pittsburgh. So what we are hoping for during this conversation is that we can get a really holistic overview of some of these lone worker technologies, both from the sort of academic realm where I'll be coming from, the employer realm that Megan is from, and then from the vendor realm that Dave will be representing. So really looking forward to that discussion. But real quickly, before I get into the meat of the presentation, I would like to turn it over to Mike Groh, who will talk a little bit about the Emerging Digital Technologies Committee. Mike.
Hello, everybody. Just wanted to talk a little bit about AIHA's Emerging Digital Technologies Committee. The committee itself, we are focused on technology, whether that be applications, websites. We do a lot of outreach through PDCs and also develop other training and really focused education all around that emerging digital technology. And we also maintain a formal relationship with AIHA's Technical Initiative Strategic Advisory Group, or TSAG, and other communities active in technology development. So again, it's a very active group. It's been engaged and used to be called the Computer Applications Committee, which can show its age a little bit. So we've definitely upgraded our name as well as with the times. So.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks.
And next, I would like to give a really quick overview of Work to Zero. So for those of you who don't know, Work to Zero is a grant-funded initiative of the National Safety Council. So we are funded primarily through the McElhatton Foundation. And what we aim to do is eliminate fatality risks with technology. So we were really excited to partner with AIHA to help provide some additional content and resources for employers who are interested in adopting technology or really just interested in learning more. And I think the photo on the slides really exemplifies well what Work to Zero is all about. So we can look at the risk of work to height. And over time, we have gotten a lot better at controlling for some of these risks. But what we aim to do is understand how technology can eliminate the need for that risk. And in the case of work to height, keep workers' feet safely on the ground. So Work to Zero is really all about understanding technology and making innovation accessible for employers. So we have a lot of free resources and tools available for employers who are interested in learning more about technology. And these are really in relation to the 5 steps of what we call the safety innovation journey. So in step 1, it's really all about assessing your risk, understanding what the risks are to your workers, and how technology can potentially mitigate those risks. The second step is understanding your tech solutions. So we have a variety of resources available, from case studies to priority technology educational white papers that really give an overview of how technology can be used and how it can be integrated to help improve your safety outcomes. The third step is to determine your readiness. So we have an interactive digital readiness survey that you can take to understand where your organization is in terms of your readiness to innovate and adopt technology. And hopefully through those resources, you can also take yourselves to the next step and continue to improve your readiness over time. Fourth, we have making the business case. So this step is all about how to have those conversations with upper management and how to make the argument for safety technology in your workplace. And then lastly, we have our pilot and implementation roadmap, which has a series of steps that you can use if you're interested in piloting technology, and really reviews some of those steps to having an iterative and a successful adoption process. So if you are interested in learning more about that, by all means, please visit our website at nsc.org/work2zero. And as I mentioned, a lot of the information in this webinar are key findings from our up and coming lone worker monitoring technology white paper. So this will be coming out here hopefully in a couple of days. And we really review a lot of the risks of lone workers, and we go in depth about what different technologies are out there, their capabilities, their functionalities, and then we also review some of the benefits and limitations of implementing these types of technologies. I also want to note that we have case studies. So within this white paper, we actually talked with 2 employers who are using lone worker devices. We talked to NiSource, who is using Blackline Safety's lone worker devices, and we talked to Avenue Living, who are using Solus Guard's panic and duress buttons. So these both feature kind of different use cases of lone worker technologies and discuss some of the lessons learned during that implementation process. So highly recommend you check out those resources after this webinar. Now to get into the meat of this presentation, let's start with the question of who are lone workers. So essentially what we're finding is that with increases in automation and leaner staffing models becoming sort of the norm, lone worker practices are becoming increasingly more common. So it's estimated that 53 million people work as lone workers across the US, Canada, and Europe. But some statistics actually put it at around 15% of the overall workforce. And there are a lot of benefits that come along with lone workers. So we're seeing that there's increased flexibility. Employers are utilizing their resources in a more efficient way. And what we also see is that there's a sense of increased worker autonomy when they are allowed to be independent and to work alone. So when we're talking about lone workers, there are sort of 4 main categories of how these people can be categorized. So a lone worker could be someone working separately from others at a fixed work site. So this may be applicable to workers in factory or warehousing who might operate machinery or manage inventory in different sections of a large facility. Alternatively, this could be a construction worker who is operating machinery or performing tasks in a different area of a construction site. Even if they are working with colleagues, if they are alone or in isolation, they would still be considered a lone worker. Similarly, this can include workers who are away from the main work site. So this can include remote and hybrid workers, or if you have employees who are traveling for work. This might include lone construction workers, land surveyors, oil and gas, drilling fields could be considered, or individuals who are working in agriculture or forestry, anytime that they are away from the main work site and away from individuals within that work site. Mobile workers are also included in this. So we think of transportation and logistics drivers, oil and gas technicians, emergency responders, or home healthcare workers. And it's also important to note that irregular or late shift work oftentimes does include the use of lone work, right? So if we think of security guards or retail attendants or service technicians, oftentimes these individuals are already working with leaner staffing models. So it's not uncommon to see lone work during those irregular or late shifts. Before I continue, I would like to launch a second poll. So I am interested in knowing whether or not you currently have lone workers in your workplace. Or I'm sorry, are you currently using lone worker monitoring technology? So I'm interested in getting to know you all. So please indicate whether or not you are using lone worker monitoring technology. And we have 3 answers here: yes, no, or no, we're looking into it. I'll give you all just a couple of minutes to answer that poll. All right, and if we could have those results displayed, Katie. All right, so it looks like about 18% said yes, 56% said no, and 26% said no, but we're looking into it. So awesome. Thank you very much for answering that, and that'll help us as we're informing some of these discussions moving forward. So next, I would like to talk through some of the risks to lone workers. So there was a really interesting study that was done of 478 companies, and 68% reported that they have had an accident involving a lone worker in the past 3 years, with 20% of those incidents being described as severe. So oftentimes, the risks to lone workers are not different to the risks faced by any other workers. So they may be at risk of things like gas or chemical exposures, falls, slips, or trips, electrocution, equipment or traffic accidents, or sudden illness. But one that I really want to touch on is workplace violence. So something that I found interesting was that between 2011 and 2020, almost a quarter of all workplace homicides were committed against employees who were working alone at the time of an incident. So what we are saying is that there are some special risks being faced by lone workers, as these individuals are often seen as being a softer or a more vulnerable target, especially by bad actors, individuals who are looking to commit a theft or a robbery. So workplace violence is absolutely another area that often isn't considered in safety risks, but is absolutely a huge risk being faced by lone workers. And as I said, a lot of these risks are not dissimilar to other roles. The difference with lone workers is that adverse outcomes may be more severe for lone workers if they can't get that timely aid or support. So if a worker does have an accident, or if they do incur a sudden illness, they may not necessarily get that quick response that they would get if they were working with a colleague. And there was another survey that was done where they talked with 224 lone workers and their supervisors. And 93% indicated that they sometimes or often work outside of cell coverage. So in those instances that they're working alone and they do have an incident, they may not even be in cell coverage to be able to call their supervisor for aid. And 63% said that they couldn't contact someone due to a lack of connection. And 19% reported that they've had difficulty getting help after an incident. So when these employees are working alone, although the employer still holds that burden of care for their safety, more often than not, they are becoming more responsible for their own health and safety. And they have to rely on their own individual decision-making, their own experiences, and their own training instead of outside support from colleagues or supervisors. And before we delve into the tech side of things, I just wanted to go through some general best practices. So in general, when looking at your lone worker safety, we recommend starting with a lone worker risk assessment. Interview your workers and talk with them about what risks they face, and conduct a formal job site or hazard analysis so that you can understand what risks are being faced by your lone workers. Of course, where possible, try to engineer out work hazards that pose a high risk for serious injuries and fatalities. So we gave the example of eliminating the need to do work at height through the use of drones, for example. Try to schedule high-risk tasks during normal business hours or when others are available to assist. Provide appropriate training and education for lone workers. And make sure to establish and communicate your check-in and check-out procedures. So even if you aren't using a technology, you want to make sure that your lone workers are checking in periodically, whether that be through phone calls, text messages, applications, emails. Just make sure that you are establishing a procedure for that, and make sure that that is being communicated and that your workers are aware of that. So now we'll start talking about lone worker technologies. So lone worker technologies refer to really any devices or technologies that help monitor, protect, and manage workers who perform activities in isolation or without close supervision. So these can come in one, if not all three different formats. So there can be wearable devices. So this might include things like smartwatches. It might include wearable radio transmitters. There are even some panic or duress buttons that are built in to look like jewelry. So these can be worn on the body and carried. There are also mobile applications. So these may be standalone applications, or they may work with the wearables or with the software. But these devices or these applications would enable workers to check in through their mobile devices. And then lastly, there are integrated software platforms. So as I said, oftentimes these three formats can actually work together, but those are the most regularly available of lone worker technologies. Oftentimes these technologies also have additional safety capabilities. So for example, there may be the ability to have two-way communication, which, as I just discussed, is huge for lone worker safety. So enabling workers to talk with their colleagues or talk with their supervisors. It may have GPS monitoring. So if the workers are outside of cell range, they are still being monitored remotely so that in the case of an emergency, if they don't respond or if they miss a check-in, their location can still be found. Some lone worker technologies have physiological monitoring. They may have the capabilities of monitoring for fatigue, to look at respiration rates, to look at skin temperature, for example, and really monitor and alert employees if any of their physiological measures are putting them at risk. There's also environmental monitoring. So some of these technologies can monitor things like thermal exposure or gas exposure. Many of these technologies also have SOS panic alarms. So these can be audible and serve as a deterrent, or they can be discreet and just alert a supervisor or a security manager, anyone that particular person may be at risk. And then lastly, they can help streamline some of those check-in and check-out procedures as we talk about. And it may be as easy as checking in on a mobile device, as hitting a button on a wearable device, or just, as I said, checking in through those applications. So there are a lot of different capabilities and functionalities of lone worker technologies. And oftentimes they work together in tandem with each other to really have a more holistic safety experience. And I'll talk about some of the different considerations when you're picking out a lone worker technology in just a moment. What I wanted to do next was I wanted to give a really quick overview of what the market looks like for these devices, because I think it tells a really interesting story about where lone worker safety is in general going. So the market for lone worker protection solutions is expected to increase from 2021 to 2026. So over those 5 years, North America is expected to see a rise in users from an estimated 429,000 to 780,000. So that's about an 82% increase. And similarly, Europe is expected to see a rise of about 57% in their users. We're also seeing that, or it's also been estimated that the market value for these technologies is going to continue to increase as well. So we see by 2026, the North American value is expected to be around 100 million, and the European market value is expected to be around 135 million. So with that increase in lone workers, we're also seeing increased interest in lone worker technologies. So with that all being said, there are these technologies and they have all of these great capabilities, but what are some considerations for adoption? If you are interested in trialing some of these technologies, what are some questions that you should be asking yourself or your vendor? So the first consideration is, what is your industry and what are the associated risks? So again, that's about understanding, of course, the workplace risks, but understand how do different deployment options interact with the environment. So an example I like to use is if you're in a public-facing role, let's say you're a healthcare worker, they may benefit from more simple and discrete personal alarms that can silently alert security or their supervisor if they are in potential danger. Audible alarm systems may be more suitable for outdoor work sites or larger facilities, but you may want to consider the difference between the two. For audible alarm systems, there is that potential that it may escalate a situation further. So really think through some of the pros and cons of using silent alarms versus louder audible alarms. You also want to consider what additional capabilities are needed to adequately address those risks. So as I talked about, in some cases, if you have workers doing long or irregular shift work, they may benefit from additional fatigue monitoring. Additionally, construction, mining, or agriculture may need additional capabilities like proximity sensors or gas detection. So really understanding what additional capabilities would be useful to your workers. The second thing you'll want to consider is the size of your organization and the ease of scalability. So you'll want to ask, how many potential users are there going to be? How many lone workers would need access to either that device or that application? And then what are the financial and personnel resources that you have available for your pilot? So mobile applications, for example, they tend to be the most simple and cost-effective way to incorporate lone worker monitoring devices. So what we recommend for smaller companies or organizations where your resources may be more constrained, the focus should be on getting those devices that have a lot of co-benefits and that show that cost effectiveness. You'll also want to ask yourself, how does the technology integrate with other existing technologies? So if you have other devices that your workers are wearing or other lone worker devices, you'll want to understand how those integrate into each other and work with your IT department. Another example I like to hear is in a lot of cases, employees are already, they have a lot that they're already wearing. So they may benefit from a smaller wearable or from a mobile application or from another device that actually integrates with pre-existing devices they're already wearing. So you'll really want to get an overview of what your employees are already using and how these things from an IT standpoint can be integrated into those technologies. And the last consideration is the ability to leverage multiple technologies. So again, you're going to want to ask yourself if more than one technology or approach is needed to adequately control for the risks faced by your lone workers. And we'll talk through some of the limitations of these devices in a moment. And then ask yourself, do you anticipate needing to customize the functionalities of these technologies? So if you are in a larger organization or you have more resources, a good solution may be an open solution, which allows you to integrate that lone worker device into existing devices or technologies. You may want to consider providers who build their solutions in-house, as that may provide some additional flexibility. So there are a lot of considerations that you should ask yourself before adopting technologies. But with that being said, I do have another poll question I would like to throw up there. And this is specifically asking about what considerations for adoption you have and what those barriers are to adoption. So the question is, what is your biggest barrier to adopting lone worker technology in your workplace? First answer is our ability to identify the right technology, our ability to build the business case for innovation based on return on investment, our cybersecurity competencies and concerns about data privacy, our organization's mindset and readiness, or employee buy-in/support. So I'd be interested for those of you who have looked into getting lone worker technologies, or those of you who have used them, what was your biggest barrier towards innovation? If we could throw up those results, that would be great. Excellent. So looking at these results, it looks like it's pretty spread across the board, but it looks like the most common answer at 35% was our organization's mindset and readiness. And then right behind that at 27% was our ability to identify the right technology. So hopefully through this presentation and through our discussion, we can touch on some of those things, and please feel free to ask any questions that you may have again in that Q&A. And then the last slide I have before we get into our discussion is a little bit about the benefits, barriers, and limitations of lone worker monitoring technologies. So I've already touched on quite a few benefits of these technologies. The first is, again, that two-way communication capability, the ability for employers to be in contact with their employees and vice versa. The potential for enhanced safety capabilities. So as I said, a lot of these technologies do have the capabilities for physiological monitoring, environmental monitoring, proximity sensors. So there are quite a few additional add-ons that can really help that device be a holistic safety measure. There's also the benefit of regulatory compliance. So there's no specific OSHA standard when it comes to lone workers, but the general duty clause does require employees to provide a safe workplace. And oftentimes issues or concerns with lone workers will fall into this general duty clause. And as a result, employers can be cited if they are not up to those standards. So one of the benefits of leveraging these lone worker devices is that employers are actively taking those steps to fulfill their regulatory obligations. And they can also provide employers with records of their safety programs. So things like logs or reports following incidents or investigations. And it can also just prove compliance and just take that extra step towards, those regulations or jurisdictional laws. So it's really just another layer of security when it comes to compliance. It's also important to think about the cost savings. So as I said, in a lot of cases, when employers cannot receive the help that they need, oftentimes those outcomes are going to be more severe. Injuries may be worse, or it may unfortunately lead to a fatality if they cannot reach out for help. So thinking of those potential cost savings that just come with enhancing worker health and safety. And then the last benefit is that streamlined lone worker processes. So what lone worker devices can enable employers to do is take a step away from any processes that may be more cumbersome or burdensome in their lone worker processes. So for example, the British Security Industry Association actually found that for organizations who are using lone worker devices, it actually helped to reduce unnecessary police calls following missed check-ins. So it resulted in an estimated 60 million pounds of savings in just 1 year. So they were finding that these lone worker devices were really helping to cut down on any reactions if a worker just didn't follow that process, couldn't follow that process, or just missed a check-in. It's also important to talk about some of these barriers and limitations. So the first is that these devices are really to mitigate injuries, but it doesn't eliminate the risk at hand. So again, that's why it's really important to consider other capabilities or other devices that can help bolster that control over that hazard. There's also that potential for false alarms or malfunctions. So we really recommend, of course, training employees on how to use these devices, making sure that you're training that employee who's responsible for monitoring those devices or responsible for making those check-ins, and giving them really clear policies and procedures to follow if a check-in is missed or if that lone worker device does sound. There are also data privacy concerns. So this is where it's really important to consult with your vendor and understand where that data goes, how it's being stored, and making sure that you're having those conversations with employees as well. This is touching on that fourth point of worker buy-in. But as I was talking about, a lot of these capabilities are very cool and they have a lot of great applications to health and safety. But when we're talking about monitoring people's locations or monitoring physiological responses, that information can be very private to employees. So when it comes to trialing and implementing these technologies, we really recommend involving employees early on in the process, making sure that you are being transparent with how this information is being used, and involve them in those conversations you're having so that they can understand where their data is going, how it's being used, and how their privacy is going to be protected should you choose to use one of these devices. And of course, there are also those upfront implementation costs. And a big barrier towards innovation in general is just not having a solid understanding on return on investment. So that's where things like case studies and hearing from users of these devices can be really helpful in understanding what that return looks like and how successful they were in terms of looking at safety metrics. So with that being said, we are going to move into our discussion and our question and answer. So I will ask our moderator and our panelists to both come off of mute and come on to your video so that we can get started with this. And we will just be going through those questions and answers. So again, please pop any questions you have into that Q&A section and we will address them as best we can. Mike, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. So a lot of very interesting information. Certainly, thank you, Kenna. Really interested to read that white paper coming up. And I think for our panelists, really wanted to ask a few questions. And please, everybody out in the audience, please, put your questions in there. I've got a few questions to get us started. So I'll go ahead and start with that. So I guess I'll start with Megan first. What are some things that need to be considered when planning to implement a lone worker safety system from a monitoring and notification standpoint?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing to consider is really like your burden of response. Who is going to be addressing those responses? Who's going to be following up on missed check-in, check-outs, and planning for the burden that's going to cause on your workforce and making sure you have the appropriate headcount to respond to those alarms or follow up on check-in, check-out.
Great, thank you. All right. We do have one question from the audience. What is the most common complaint or barrier that prospective clients are making? I guess, Dave, would you like to weigh in on that one?
Sure. I being involved in the vendor side of it and providing a lone worker system, albeit our system really applies specifically to lone workers who require gas detection. The two biggest barriers that we see are, number one, buy-in from or concern about buying from the employees because employees don't want to be tracked per se. Number one. And number two would be concerns about overall connectivity. And on both cases, I would comment this way: legitimate concerns without question. But we live in a world today where we rely so heavily on our cell phones to do everything, and we take them for granted. And connectivity with our cell phones certainly isn't great. But we accept it and we live with it. Yet when we're looking at a lone worker system, we want connectivity, or people are looking for connectivity to be 100%. And it's just not realistic. And we're perfectly happy letting perfection get in the way of really good. And so that to me as a vendor is a little bit frustrating. In most cases, I can prove 94, 95, 96% connectivity, which is tremendously better than having nothing today. And in terms of, the tracking concern, in most systems, we know where someone is located now. We don't know where someone was located 5 minutes ago, an hour ago. We don't track breadcrumbs. We don't store breadcrumbs. We know where you're at now. We know where you were in case of in the terms of an incident. But we can't tell you any place you've been.
Right. I think that's very well stated. And I know certainly, from a business that has, over 1,000 lone worker service technicians across the nation, it is challenging. We utilize GPS, we utilize different software types of tools to really track their whereabouts. If they've had an excessive idle in the vehicle, we know about it. It may be a concerning thing, and that sends text alerts and alerts to our manager. So, and again, I think it's what I'm interested in understanding. Are you aware of any of your clients that maybe have layered technology like GPS and other things, that Kenna had shared earlier?
Not layered technology, yes, from the standpoint of, I don't believe in most situations that any one technology is going to get the job done in terms of connectivity, especially for very remote workers where, cell technology is probably good 80% of the time, just to throw a number out. But what do you do with the other 20? You need satellite technology. Maybe in some cases you need to backfill that cell technology with Wi-Fi, maybe something else. So technology is definitely a key, and we do see people layer technologies, if not just for need, for redundancy. But I will say this: in terms of any lone worker solution, I believe, unless it's an on-premise solution that has other capabilities, GPS or other form of location tracking is a must. Because any type of alarm or alert that comes from a lone worker, if we don't know where it comes from, it's not going to do us much good.
Okay. Do have another question here in the chat from Sean. Would like to have Megan address this one. So Sean indicated, are there any efforts for companies to formally adopt compliance-like standards to push adoption of safety-oriented technology like lone worker, ISO 45001, for example?
So I can speak to our company specifically.
Sure.
So our lone worker programs really started out of Canadian regulations. So our company works in both the US and Canada, so all of North America. And our lone worker program originally started with our 4-gas monitors out of Canada, because there were regulations in Canada that required lone worker technology. And we were very happy with the results and saw the value in them. And so then we eventually rolled out the program to all of our operations in the United States. We adopted from that Canadian standard to start with.
Great. Thank you, Megan.
Mhm.
Did have another, it's from an anonymous attendee, about usability and user acceptance. And again, it's, the person wrote, they have a hard time getting their folks to wear noise dosimeters because they think we're recording them. I've heard that a million times. Tracking locations seems like a huge ask. Any advice on how to talk to employees about why it's important, Megan?
Yeah, so for context, to my knowledge, we use three different types of lone worker technology in our company. We use an app for check-in, check-out. We use our 4 gas monitors, which have a GPS component. And we also have an in-vehicle monitoring system, which also tracks GPS. And I can understand that's a very hard sell. It's one of the things that we have our workers ask us about when they're concerned about these different devices. And what I usually tell them, and usually what's the biggest comfort to them, is as soon as your vehicle is off, or as soon as your 4 gas monitor is off, it's not tracking your location anymore. And I can pull the map up and show them exactly how it works. And they really come to learn that it's true when they lose their device, and I can't tell them where it is because it's off. And so I'm like, well, this is where your last known location was for your 4 gas monitor. Look there and then try to trace your steps backwards. And so that, knowing that they have the power to turn that device off and stop the location tracking is very helpful. And then I would say the other part of that is who has access to this information is very restricted. Is only restricted to like myself and the core team of like environmental health and safety people that utilize the portal. Our 24-hour response center, so the people who are actually going to respond to alarms when they happen, and then their direct supervisor. No one else has information besides those people, and that's also very helpful because these are people they already know and trust to not abuse the system.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'd like to ask another question here, and this one is really, it's about the pros and cons of, using, I'll say an app based solution versus standalone devices. I guess, have you used both in your applications, Megan, and then like Dave to weigh in on this as well? But why don't you go ahead and start? Which ones have you tried and are you using?
Yeah, so like I said, we have those 3 different types of technologies that we use. The check-in, check-out, it's great. It's just, it's very binary though. And so, a worker, because I work in the oil and gas industry, so we have plants and we also have lone workers that go directly to our field locations and are alone all day. And so the check-in, check-out app is good for just that kind of base level. Did you make it to work? Did you leave work? And so at the end of the day, the supervisor kind of goes into their team and is able to see, okay, who's still out in the field, and then follow up with them via phone call or something and find out why they're still there. Whereas our 4 gas monitors and our IVMS system, they're much more advanced where, if someone falls, our 24/7 response center gets a notification and they reach out to that individual to find out if they're okay, or if they had a high gas exposure, or if they triggered their SOS alarm. So that response time is much more immediate. If we only had the app, then someone could get injured during the day and we wouldn't know it until it was time for them to go home. And so having that wearable technology creates a much faster response.
Great. So Dave, what are your thoughts?
So yeah, our systems are built on different things and different technologies, and one of the things we bring to the market is the ability to connect different ways. One of those ways is through an app, through a smartphone app that we call the iNet Now Sync app, where our gas detector will connect to the cloud, connect to our live monitoring console, connect to our live monitoring center through the cell phone. and through the app on the cell phone. And so we do use apps in that way, as well as having direct connectivity from the device itself.
Okay, great. Thank you. Having another question in the chat, and I'll open it to each of the panelists here. Where do you think these devices will be in the future? How do you anticipate them changing? So who'd like to take that on first?
Yeah, I guess I can take that on, being on the device side of it. I certainly see devices getting smaller, becoming more wearable, less obtrusive, but being able to do more things. You know, a simple man down or a panic or a fall device. There are so many more things that can affect a lone worker that will get incorporated into these devices without having separate devices, like heat stress and, you know, heart rate. So many different biometrics and things that are available to be able to determine when a lone worker is stressed, is in trouble, or maybe overall not fit for duty.
Great. Have another question that I think is very interesting here in the chat. Any advice on how to evaluate the effectiveness of these devices and really that return on investment? Were they worth the investment? I guess, Megan, what's been your experience?
Yeah, so I've been kind of the SME for one of our 4-gas monitor lone worker devices for the past like 5 years. And over those 5 years, we've expanded our fleet significantly. And so for me, the biggest thing that's how I evaluate effectiveness is, you know, how are our alarms, how effective are they being responded to? Are they coming through? Are they doing what they're supposed to do, right? And so one of the ways like we do that is, you know, we take feedback from the end users, and then we also take feedback from the local program managers. And then we also have a lot of reporting that we get. So there's a live portal where I'm able to pull up and all kinds of analytics and kind of look at, you know, the program health as a whole, or even drill down post incident and look at how the device impacted that incident response. And so the analytics are very helpful. And then again, the feedback from the end users. And how we kind of grew as a company in the devices is we started with a small group, tested it out, got feedback, and then continued to grow the program over the course of a couple years as our other technology kind of, you know, that came to the end of its lifespan. And then we were able to replace it with these lone worker 4-gas monitors.
Great. So, and Kenna touched on this in the beginning, but again, data privacy is a huge concern, and this is another good question in the chat. You know, any data privacy concerns that you've come across, you know, when you're dealing with like your legal team, with, you know, your IT or digital technology team, you know, any of those issues surface, you know, when you're looking at a cloud system?
Yeah, so again, like who has access to that information is very restricted. You're not able to log into the system unless I give you a login, basically. And we as a company kind of rolled out a privacy policy in the past like 2 years that actually came about more from our in-vehicle monitoring system and concerns around that and its tracking, because it's a little bit, if you're driving your vehicle, it's on and it's working. Whereas the 4-gas monitor has a power button. And so if people feel like they have a little bit more control on tracking from that perspective. But we have never had any issues with anyone getting hacked, any privacy issues. We've been very fortunate. And, you know, I attribute that to how we safeguard that information.
Right. Okay. Another question, any issues with monitoring the lone worker lone worker systems for emergency situations? Was it staffed by, the role, by an emergency response team, security? How was that handled?
Yeah, so from the company or like the worker perspective, our devices they trigger automatic alerts for what we have set up, right? So for us, our primary automatic alerts are going to be our SOS alarms and then our fall alerts. And those trigger an automatic response to our 24/7 staffed emergency response center. In the US, that is an internal thing to Oventive. In Canada, we actually use the 4Guest Monitor vendor service. And again, it's a 24/7 staffed call center. And then there's a script that they follow in terms of providing response based off of what the worker says. And the technology that we have actually allows both two-way text and two-way call on the 4Guest monitor itself. And so regardless of whether or not someone has good cell service, it doesn't matter. In the US, the devices work off of cell service, but they use 3 different networks. So we haven't encountered anywhere yet where we don't have coverage. And then in Canada, it's based off of satellite. And so we actually haven't, the ERP that it provides has been exceptional, and it really cuts down that response time a lot.
And that's great. It sounds like you've integrated that into your crisis response team.
Yes.
That's excellent. Okay. Dave, any of your clients, any of them that you're aware of how they've handled it similarly from an emergency standpoint?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would second everything that Meg said. Is our systems are built to work exactly the same way, and it's really what you're looking for from an end user standpoint. Our system is designed in general to be very self-contained and self-operated, and is not based on check-ins, but is based on live monitoring and alerts that are sent out to an individual, a team, anyone you want, text or email, with an escalation plan on top of that. But if you want a live man 24/7 call center, that's an option as well. But just like I think Megan said at the beginning, one of the keys, and before you go into a system, is to understand what you want the response to be, and really clearly lay out what you want the response to be, and make sure that the system you get into can match that.
I should add that the devices we use also generate automatic text and email notifications.
Yep.
So in addition to going to that call center that's staffed, it also will automatically send that text message to whoever's set up for that alert. So that way operations can see when that alert comes through, and they can also see when it's resolved.
Okay. And I think we've got time for one last question. How do you communicate to your field workers and train them on these solutions? So, and a follow-up to that is, do all communications come from EHS, or do you leverage your communications team, field managers, company intranet?
I say we rely on our operations managers a lot, because without operations buy-in, EHS is going to have a heck of a time implementing anything new. And so anytime we implement a new program or rolling out a new feature on our lone worker devices, we get with those ops stakeholders first, get their buy-in, get them to see the value in it, and then we use them to help support the rollout. And then as far as the training part of it goes, when people are brought on as new hires, it's part of their day 1 training. And then we have subsequent training annually thereafter, just to remind people, how these devices work, or if there was any changes, then we also do a rollout of those changes. And those are usually in our safety meetings or something like that, a little bit less formal.
Great.
Fantastic. Well, we are just about out of time. Megan, Dave, and Mike, thank you all so much for joining us today, and for that really informative discussion. Please stay tuned on our future webinars, and we're going to throw up a poll right here as you're exiting. Let us know what you'd like the topic to be for our next webinar. But otherwise, I hope you all have a great day. Again, thank you all for joining, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day.